The Last of Us was huge, and we feel like we haven't talked about it enough on gameranx. With The Last of Us 2 announced and leaving us kinda high and dry for any new info, let's take a look back with 10 Last of Us facts you might not have known. Starting off with number 10, let's talk about Ellie's knife. When you beat The Last of Us, Ellie's knife is shown on the windowsill, but it isn't there before you start the game. And if you do beat the game and then start up another playthrough, the knife disappears again. So it's kind of like when you start a new game, Ellie needs the knife because she's gonna go out and do some shit. But when you beat it and, they're at Tommy's town and they're taking it easy and she doesn't need it, so she puts it on the windowsill. This is one of those really, really small details that Naughty Dog is really good at. Like the small details and very subtle imagery that's there to say something, but like in a small, quiet way that you might not really notice, which is pretty dope. And at number 9, this isn't really the most secret fact, but we still wanted to talk about it. It's The Last of Us Live. The cast of The Last of Us actually got together for one night to perform scenes from the game together on a stage to about like 200 people. But what's really interesting about it is that they did a scene that wasn't included in the game and serves as an epilogue. Head writer Neil Druckmann came on stage and set the scene and then please asked for no one to film and record it because the scene was never going to be released to the general public. While he has discussed the scene and he kind of insinuated that Ellie is aware of Joel lying to her, the scene is basically just Joel and Ellie talking about stuff and going around Tommy's town. But what's really interesting is that in that scene, Joel gets Ellie a guitar and then mentions that he did promise to teach her how to play. And then the Last of Us Part 2 trailer is Ellie playing the guitar. So, yeah, it seems like there's something you can put together there. If you haven't heard or seen much about The Last of Us Live, definitely look up and watch what you can because it's pretty interesting. And at number 8, you probably never even stopped to think, but Joel and Ellie kind of have last names. I say kind of because in The Last of Us Japanese game manual, it actually lists Joel and Ellie and their last names. It's Joel Miller and Ellie Williams. This isn't really considered 100% canon on the actual Last of Us wiki. It's considered non-canon, but it's official material from the game's release, so take it as you will. If you really like these characters and you really want them to have last names, that's what you can go with. But to me, I still just know them as Joel and Ellie. And at number 7, speaking of the Japanese version of the game, The Last of Us actually sold really, really well in Japan. This may not really sound like the biggest deal, especially for some of us closed-minded North Americans that think that Japanese games don't really want anything to do with our games, but The Last of Us did really well when it released in Japan. It sold almost 118,000 copies within its first week of release, and it sold through something like 88% of its initial shipment. With the rating equivalents of the ESRB in Japan, it received the highest rating, 0Z. A rating of that high in Japan usually affects sales. So it was pretty insane for The Last of Us to come from overseas, completely surpass over its high rating, and still sell really well and kill it in sales. The people of Japan really embraced and loved the story of The Last of Us, and that's pretty awesome. And at number 6, let's talk about Ashley Johnson. She's the voice of Ellie and is someone who you may actually recognize from a couple of other things. She really has this habit of showing up in small parts in places you wouldn't really expect. She played Chrissy in the last few seasons of Growing Pains, that little girl with the mop of curly hair, and then she's also in the first Avengers movie. She's the waitress who Captain America saved, and then she gets all weird about it on camera on the news. She has a very small role, but there are a ton of deleted scenes from that movie that really focus on her specifically. So maybe she was meant to have a bigger role in the MCU, or maybe eventually she was meant to be another hero and this was going to be her introduction. We'll probably never know. But another small fun fact about voice actresses from the game, Merle Dandridge, she's the voice behind Marlene. She's also the voice of Alex Vance from Half-Life 2. But at number 5, speaking of actresses, there was initially some controversy behind Ellie's look upon the actual announcement of the game.
What's this bullshit?
Immediately after the reveal, there were a lot of direct comparisons to the actress Ellen Page, with Ellie looking eerily similar, to the point some people thought that Ellen Page was actually starring in the game. For a while after the announcement, that was like the mainstream consensus of thought. After this, the next trailer in May 2012 sported a slightly redesigned Ellie. Apparently, developers at Naughty Dog listened and decided to tweak her face a bit after all the buzz. But even with that slight redesign, Ellen Page has actually said on record during an interview that Naughty Dog quote-unquote ripped off my likeness. I guess he can't please them all. And at number 4, you may not have known this, but The Last of Us originally had a very different story. There were a lot of things that were changed during the development process of The Last of Us, and one of the bigger changes is that Tess was originally the main antagonist of the game, with her and her gang that Joel was a part of hunting down Joel, with Marlene being more of a friendly face who was originally supposed to die early on. And where the game ended in the final game wasn't actually the end. Right after that part where they're driving, after Joel steals Ellie away, Tess catches up, rams him off the road, and catches Joel while Ellie escapes. Ellie eventually catches back up with Joel and kills Tess right before Tess kills Joel, and then this would be the first time Ellie really kills someone, instead of it being David like in the final game. All of this was explained by the writer Neil Druckmann while speaking at a panel for the IDGA Toronto chapter. It's all about how he originally pitched The Last of Us, and it's pretty interesting. And at number 3, speaking of rewrites, Naughty Dog actually went back and changed Ellie's character with rewrites and the general way she comes off after seeing Ashley Johnson's voiceover and motion capture performances. Since the actors were allowed to improvise and ad-lib the script during performance, Ellie very much came into her own as a completely different character, and Naughty Dog liked it and rolled with it. Ellie was originally intended to be much more timid and passive for most of the game. Johnson's verbalisms, though, drove Ellie to be a much more brash, aggressive, and rough around the edges character, and I'm glad they went with that because it totally works.
You have more of a fucking chance if you let me help.
And at number 2, The Last of Us has a lot of inspiration. Some it wears on its sleeve, but some are a bit more subtle. The previously mentioned writer of the game, Neil Druckmann, read City of Thieves and was inspired by the relationship between two very different characters who, while constantly at odds, eventually developed an unconventional relationship through all those hardships. So he set out to portray a similar arc of character development between Joel and Ellie. But the atmosphere, the vibe, and the relationship between Joel and Ellie was actually inspired by author Cormac McCarthy's The Road, but they eventually pulled away from that a little bit for obvious reasons. The writers Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley went and saw No Country for Old Men in theaters, and they decided that the tense, brutal, close, and simple combat between desperate people in close proximity would make for great combat scenarios for the game. And in fact, Joel was actually named after director Joel Cohen, who is the director of both No Country for Old Men and the True Grit remake. And at number 1, the infected cordyceps enemies initially had a very different concept. Before the team decided on using the fungal infected people you see in the final game, the zombie-ish creatures looked like bald, fanged beasts with like this stringy, gross fungus growing off their back. It actually sounds just as terrifying. You probably know this, but the cause of the zombie apocalypse is actually based on real-life organisms. There is this parasitic fungus called Ophiocordyceps unilateralatus, or however you say it, I'm not a scientist, but it's known for taking over an ant's minds and controlling its motor skills, basically making it a zombie. This was actually used as early stuff to tease the game before its real announcement. In The Last of Us, the fungus takes over most of humanity's minds and turns them into zombies. It just took Naughty Dog a while to actually conceive and embrace that. Apparently, a lot of enemy types were left on the cutting room floor, including cordyceps-infected animals. There's been concept arts and even rumors and reports that this was an actual scene that was worked on for the game, with Joel running from a giant infected monstrous elephant. It sounds kind of crazy and ridiculous, but also kind of awesome. But who knows, maybe we'll see infected animals in The Last of Us too. Those are some cool facts we thought you might find interesting, but we want to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are some of your favorite aspects about The Last of Us, from the development, to the story, to the characters? Let's talk about this stuff. In fact, let's talk about anything Last of Us. If you like this video and maybe learned a thing or two, clicking that like button helps us out a ton, and we really appreciate it. But subscribing if you're new is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.